She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Jared, I have spent 8 years watching you be comfortable with almost. I am not almost anymore." Then she said his name. Colt. She said it the way people say the name of something they've chosen over something they've settled for. She said she had already found an apartment. She said it like she was reporting weather. "I am Jared Trussman. I am 44 years old. I was born in Gary, Indiana, in a house where the heat sometimes worked and the food always did, because my father, Reuben Trussman, was a man who believed that a family should never feel the full weight of what he was carrying. I grew up watching him do that, absorb, adjust, rebuild. And I thought I understood what that looked like from the outside, standing in my kitchen in Lincoln Park that morning. Holding the coffee mug that used to sit on his counter, I understood for the first time what it felt like from the inside. I did not say a word, not because I had nothing to say. I had 8 years of things to say. I had the warehouse in Gary where I worked night shifts at 22, sorting freight for $7 an hour, while I finished my degree at Purdue on a scholarship I had applied for 4 times before it came through. I had the first version of the software I built at 27, a supply chain routing tool I coded in a studio apartment on a laptop with a cracked hinge, solving a problem that billion-dollar companies had decided wasn't worth solving. I had Trust Ops Global, which I had grown quietly, deliberately, the way my father taught me to build anything worth keeping, without announcing it, without performing it, without needing the room to applaud before the foundation was finished. I had all of that, and Amira was standing in the kitchen of the house I bought, telling me she was leaving me for a 21-year-old, and describing her job as her financial independence. She did not know what her job was. That is the part one needs you to hold on to, not the betrayal. Betrayals are ordinary. People leave. People choose wrong. People confuse movement for progress and call it growth. What matters, what changes everything about the morning she stood in that kitchen and carved the word, almost into the air between us, is that she had been walking into my building 5 days a week for 2 years without ever connecting the name on her employment contract to the man she was leaving. I put the mug down on the counter, gently, the way my father always set things down, like objects deserve to be treated with the same care as people. And I smiled, once, barely, not because anything was funny, because something had just become very clear, and clarity, even when it arrives inside grief, has its own particular feeling. She was already gone by the time I turned around. Please, before I continue, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. 8 months before that kitchen, I came home to find Amira's laptop open on the table. The screen showed a LinkedIn profile. 21 years old. Tempe, Arizona. I closed it gently and started making dinner. I noticed a pattern after that. She stopped asking about my day and started asking about money. Whether I had considered going back to school, whether logistics software was really a career, or just something I'd fallen into. She asked these questions the way someone asks when they've already decided the answer doesn't matter, just confirming what they suspected. I stood at that stove stirring something that didn't need stirring, and I made a decision, not an emotional one, a structural one. I called Devlin Hargrove that night and said only one sentence. I need the whole picture put somewhere safe. Devlin didn't ask why. He'd known me 16 years. He understood that a man who builds quietly also protects quietly, and that the time to move assets into defensible positions is before the war is declared, not after. He said, "I'll have everything restructured by Friday." I hung up and finished dinner. Amira came home at 9. She said she'd been working late. I said I'd save her a plate. Devlin Hargrove's office has no diplomas on the wall. One plant, a whiteboard that is always half erased. I have known him since I was 28 years old, and I have never once seen him flustered, not in depositions, not in boardrooms, not when a federal audit arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning 3 years ago. He walked me through the architecture. Trust Ops Global sits beneath 4 layers of holding structure. My name appears nowhere in any public filing until the 4th tier. What Amira's attorneys had requested in discovery was a portrait of a man whose documented personal assets included a Honda Accord, a pension account, and a checking balance that would embarrass a recent college graduate. Devlin said, "They're building a case on a floor that doesn't exist." I asked him if Amira had figured out where she worked. He said no. I opened my desk drawer and removed a folder. I didn't open it in front of him. I just held it and thought about the night I built the first version of Trust Ops in a cracked hinge laptop, and how Amira had been asleep in the next room. I said, "Schedule the mediation." Devlin wrote one word on the whiteboard and turned it away from me before I could read it. I didn't ask what it said. Devlin presented the divorce petition on a Tuesday. Amira's attorney, Gerald Plum, 54, 30 years of Southside divorce work, good at reading what's documented and dangerously confident about what isn't, had filed for an even split of all marital assets. That word, documented. It was carrying weight it didn't know it was carrying. Devlin walked me through what came next. Mediation, not court. Nadine Voss, a former family law judge who'd left the bench because she found courtrooms too theatrical. She read financial disclosures the way a surgeon reads an x-ray, looking for what's missing, not just what's there. Devlin said, "The only thing I need to know is whether you wanted to understand what happened or just feel it." I thought about my father's kitchen, the eggs with too much butter, the way Reuben Trussman absorbed the mill's cuts in 1994 without letting his children feel the cold. I said, "Both? In that order?" Devlin nodded. He picked up his marker and wrote something on the whiteboard. Then he turned away before I could see. I didn't ask. I already knew we weren't in a hurry. Patience, Devlin once told me, is the only weapon that never runs out of ammunition. Colt Rafferty was 21 years old and had never held a job longer than 4 months. His father owned a chain of car washes in Tempe and paid his rent. I learned this from Priya Matson, who sat 3 desks from Amira at Trust Ops and had eaten lunch with me exactly once at a company event without knowing who I was. Priya called me not to report anything. She called because she was uncomfortable and didn't know what else to do with it. She said Amira had been taking long lunches, coming back with her collar adjusted wrong, telling the team she was in client meetings. She mentioned that Amira had said in the break room that her husband was comfortable with almost and that she deserved more than almost. Then Priya said Colt had called me a loser. Easy and casual. The way people say things about people they've never had to face. I sat with that for a moment. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel sadness. I felt something closer to sorrow, for Colt specifically, because he had no idea what room he was standing next to, and rooms eventually make themselves known. The night before mediation, I drove back to Gary. Reuben made eggs the way he always has. Too much butter, yolks broken, toast slightly burned. We didn't talk about the divorce. We talked about the warehouse where I'd worked nights at 22. We talked about 1994, when the mill cut hours and the family ate eggs for 6 months because eggs were cheap and filling, and Reuben never once let us feel the shame of it. He said, "A man who built something real doesn't have to announce it. He just has to wait for the moment when the room has to reckon with it." I'd heard him say it before. It landed differently now. Before I left, I took the coffee mug from his cabinet, the twin to the one I'd held the morning Amira spoke her last honest words to me, and put it in my jacket pocket. I didn't know why. I just knew I wanted it in the room tomorrow. Back in Chicago, Amira was at dinner with Gerald Plum and Colt. Priya told me later she'd laughed about the Honda Accord and said, "He has nothing. We're going to be fine." Her attorney had smiled, but not all the way. Nadine Voss was already seated when we arrived. She didn't stand to greet anyone. She had a printed copy of every submitted document and a pen she hadn't uncapped. Gerald Plum built his case with the confidence of a man holding what he believed was a complete map. The Honda Accord, the pension, the checking account. He presented each one like evidence of a life that had never amounted to much. Amira sat beside him, looking like someone who had already won. Devlin sat beside me, writing nothing, watching the clock. Nadine said, "We have 4 hours. I'd like to make sure we use the last 30 minutes well." Devlin leaned close and said quietly, "That's our window." I watched Nadine's eyes move across the documents Plum had submitted. She was reading the way she always read, looking for the shape of what wasn't there. She glanced up once, briefly, not at Plum, not at the documents, at me, just once, like she already suspected the floor was different from what she'd been shown. I held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then I looked at the clock. 30 minutes. We just had to get there. 3 hours and 20 minutes in, Devlin opened his briefcase for the first time. He removed one document and placed it face down on the table. He said, "Before we close, Ms. Voss, I'd like to introduce the question of beneficial ownership in a multi-tier holding structure." The room changed temperature. Without anyone touching a window, Gerald Plum's pen stopped moving. His left hand, resting on the table, went completely still. Amira turned from the wall she'd been staring at and looked at me for the first time in 3 hours. I kept my eyes on Nadine. Nadine uncapped her pen. She said, "Mr. Hargrove, you have a floor." Under the table, I felt the outline of my father's mug in my jacket pocket. I pressed my thumb against the ceramic and thought about the warehouse, the cracked hinge laptop, the first line of code that made something real happen. Amira's hand found her phone beneath the table. She didn't look down at it. She just held it, the way people hold something when they need to feel like an exit exists. Devlin turned the document face up and slid it across to Nadine. The document was a corporate organizational chart. At the top, a holding company. Below it, through 4 subsidiary layers, Trust Ops Global. At the bottom, attached to the 4th-tier operating entity, a beneficial ownership certificate. The name on that certificate was Jared A. Trustman. Nadine read it once, consulted a supporting document Devlin had already provided, set her pen down. She looked at Gerald Plum and said, "Counselor, your client is employed as Senior Director of Partnerships at Trust Ops Global. Your client husband is the sole beneficial owner of Trust Ops Global. The documented marital estate you presented represents approximately 0.003% of the actual marital estate." The room was quiet in a way that had a shape. Amira didn't speak, didn't move, but her face did something only I could see, because I was the only one watching, a reckoning arriving in real time. The exact moment a person understands that the floor they were standing on was always someone else's floor. Inside, I wasn't triumphant. I was grieving, still grieving. The way you grieve something that never stopped being a loss no matter how many floors you build above it. She looked at me directly for the first time all day, and I looked back. Mediation recessed 45 minutes. I stood at the 14th floor window, looking down at West Madison. My hand was in my jacket pocket, wrapped around the mug, but I didn't pull it out. Devlin stood beside me. He didn't mention the hearing. He said, "Your father ever tell you about the time the mill almost closed in '94? I said he had. Devlin said, "He told me too, at your wedding." Said the difference between a man who survives and a man who doesn't is whether he built something while everyone else was distracted by the crisis. I looked down the hall through the glass partition. Amira was sitting very still. Gerald Plum was on his phone, his posture carrying particular exhaustion of a man who has just been handed a different case than the one he prepared for. Amira wasn't looking at Plum. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was doing math, real math, the kind that happens when every number you assume turns out to be the wrong number entirely. Plum leaned down and said something to her quietly before we were called back in. She didn't respond. She just stood up. When mediation resumed, Devlin presented the full discovery package. 4 years of audited financials, the complete beneficial ownership chain, 3 additional holding entities with documented valuations, and a single-page letter from Trust Ops Global's board confirming my ownership position and my standing authority over all subsidiary employment decisions, including those in the partnerships division. Gerald Plum read the letter twice. He asked for a recess to confer with his client. Nadine denied it. Plum began revising his position in real time. It is the most painful thing a lawyer can be made to do, dismantle his own argument in the room where he built it, while the other side watches without helping. Amira's right hand, flat on the table the entire second session, developed a tremor, not dramatic, a single sustained vibration, like a string plucked wrong. In my head, I heard my father's voice from the kitchen in Gary. "Build the thing. Be quiet about it. Let it speak when the room is finally ready to listen." Nadine looked at me one more time before she prepared to deliver terms. Not at Devlin, not at the documents, at me, like she understood which one of us had been waiting longest for this room to be ready. Nadine delivered terms that were fair by every legal standard and devastating by every assumption Amira had carried into the room. Not punitive, just real. And reality, when you spent years avoiding it, arrives with disproportionate force. I signed where Devlin told me to sign. I didn't look at a mirror while I did. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and set my father's coffee mug on the table in front of me. I didn't explain it. Some things don't need explaining. Some things just need to be present in the room. In the hallway afterward, Amira stopped me. She said one thing. I won't repeat what it was. I'll only tell you what I said back. I said, I was never almost Amira. You just decided what I was before you let me be anything. I walked to the elevator. Devlin was already holding the door. Driving home through Chicago, I held a mug in my lap. I thought about the warehouse, the cracked hinge laptop, the eggs with too much butter. I thought about my father saying the room would eventually have to reckon with what you built. She told me I was comfortable with almost. What she never understood, what she walked past every single day without seeing, was that I was never almost. I was always the whole thing. I was just quiet about it.